rates in the last half century, almost in line with his first term.
Neil, can you separate fact and fiction there?
So what's definitely true is that inflation is not nearly as high as it was a couple of years ago. We're running about 3% inflation. That's a lot better than we saw back in 2022. The problem is that 3% inflation is coming on top of the Biden-era price increases. So that's not much solace if you're having trouble affording groceries or whatever you want to buy. An extra 3% bump on top of that is not something you like to see. And on Secretary Bessent's comments about real wages, it really just depends on which measure of inflation you choose and which definition of wages. And there's a lot of different data sets you can use. And so you can find ways to cut the numbers where it looks like wage growth is quite strong after inflation, others where it's more steady. But, look, inflation is down. It's not defeated.
Yeah, and 1% wage growth is still below 3% inflation, if I'm doing my math correctly. So people aren't getting ahead, even if you accept that as truth, that it's 1% up on the year. Mark, the president gave himself an A+++ on the economy. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro responded saying, quote, his policies have hurt the very communities that propelled him to the White House. And according to the publication's polling, a plurality of Trump's own voters say the cost of living is the worst they can remember. How big of a political problem is the economy for the president?
Well, it's huge when you consider that was supposedly his strength coming in both after the election, but also historically. I mean, voters, fundamentally trusted him with the economy. I think there's only so much more time he has. I think he's probably exhausted his limit in which he can just sort of blanket blame the last administration for all economic woes people are feeling. And the truth is, as reflected in the numbers we just saw, is yes, Trump voters are fundamentally being affected by this. They acknowledge it, they're aware of it, and it's reflecting very poorly on the president. This will become even more so if these Obamacare subsidies expire and these costs sort of start devastating a lot of red state Trump voters coming into the next year. So this is a looming problem. It doesn't seem to be getting better anytime soon. And there are a lot of indicators that would suggest that this is probably going to, continue to be a big challenge for the president and the administration.
And maybe the Republican Party, when you look at the results of an election last night in Miami, a Democrat won the mayor's race there for the first time in nearly 30 years. Both candidates in that race were zeroing in on the affordability issue in their campaigns. It also comes after Democrats swept Republicans in off-year elections last month. Mark, what should Republicans be taking away from this?
Well, I think nervousness. I mean, that's certainly what you hear from Republicans you talk to around here. I mean, these are not small, flips either. I mean, the Miami mayor's race, it's a little bit particular to Miami, which is kind of a unique population. But there are special elections in Georgia last night that flipped massively for Democrats. That's been consistent pretty much all over the country. There haven't really been any outliers that we've seen. And Republicans are nervous. I think we're going to see a lot of them retiring. We're already seeing that. There'll probably be a wave of them. And I don't think, look, you get a sense that if you look at the body language of the people behind Trump, I don't think people are fully tuning him out, but his message seems, I guess, muddled at best, but definitely very unfocused. And then when you see Scott Bessent up there, who's a really weird character for that kind of mix of crowd, if you looked at the faces of people behind him, it was just kind of weird. It was a weird contrast. But anyway, look, I mean, this is what Trump does. He obviously has steadfast support from a lot of people in places like Pennsylvania. We'll see how that holds going forward.
If you don't admit there's a problem, how do you fix it? Jake, did the president talk about any new plans or policies to improve people's financial situation?
Not really. There was a little bit of touting of the way that economically the lives of Pennsylvanians specifically has been improved in Trump's first term. But we were teased all week long from White House officials that we were going to see some type of actual substantive policy announced or introduced or at least teased in this speech. There was really no version of that at all in the hour and 40 minutes that Donald Trump spoke last night. I spoke with a White House official earlier today who said there is a lot of economic policy coming down the line, and the strategy from the White House is to have a lot of things set up that when midterms roll around, Republicans want to vote back in conservatives so that they can fully put that into practice, put those laws into order. But we've not seen that policy yet. We didn't hear it introduced last night like we were told from White House officials we would, and we're still continuing to wait for some of that actual substantive policy.
Neil, we also know today the Federal Reserve is expected to cut rates for a third time this year. The shutdown, however, canceled or delayed key data on jobs, on inflation. How might that influence today's decision, and what will you be watching for?
The thing I'm really watching is how much division and dissent there is within the Federal Reserve. It looks like, as you say, they probably are going to cut rates a little later today, but we could see multiple dissents for the first time in a while. A lot of the officials really do believe that inflation is the greater problem right now, and that the job market's holding up okay, and that they want to be more cautious, especially in this absence of data, in this environment where we haven't really gotten reliable jobs numbers, inflation data in quite a long time. There's a number of officials who seem to want to pump the brakes and say, let's just wait and see how the economy evolves heading into 2026. But again, it looks like the most likely outcome is they will cut rates one more time, but maybe signal don't count on more rate cuts to come next year.
Mark, the president has made no secret that he wants interest rates to go down, and he's consistently gone after Fed Chair Jerome Powell, whose term is up next year. Kevin Hassett, who's the head of Trump's Economic Council, has now emerged as a frontrunner for this job. And Hassett told the Wall Street Journal that he would not bow to political pressure to cut interest rates if he became the chair. At the same time, he also said there's plenty of room to cut interest rates more. Do you trust him that he wouldn't bow to political pressure?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, he basically works for the administration now, and Trump's his desire, certainly through this administration and certainly the last one, has just been cut interest rates. I mean, he's been basically at war with the Fed chair, even the one he appointed, Jerome Powell, over this issue. And like, that's just sort of his thing. It's unclear what kind of dissenting voices are even being heard or will be allowed, or what data they're looking at. But I do think that clearly, I mean, Kevin Hassett is going to be aligned with the administration, and probably will be for as long as he's in that job, or if he ever gets that job, but if that's the case going forward.
Yeah, a lot of ifs at this moment. Jake, what more are you learning about the president's plans for his next Fed chair pick?
Yeah, I mean, we expect that today, and even possibly right now, those interviews are beginning to take place. There's this short list, but you are right that it is the National Economic Council advisor Kevin Hassett who has kind of that top seat, that most favorability among people right now. And I think the president has said the quiet part out loud. He was asked in that Politico interview yesterday, is it a litmus test that the person you select will immediately slash interest rates? And he said yes. So Hassett can be saying that he is not going to bend to the will of the president, but that is essentially what Trump is saying is a requirement to be selected for the job itself. And there's actually a recent CNBC polling that said a lot of Americans are concerned there's going to be too much intertwining between the Fed chair and the president. But essentially, Trump is saying that's what he wants, and those interviews are taking place today.
Jake Traylor, Mark Leibovich, and Neil Irwin, thank you all so much. Up next, President Trump defends his defense secretary.